Hi everyone, this is James Tryon, and today we're going to be talking about multilingual options for WordPress in LearnDash. As I said, I'm James. I'm the LearnDash training specialist here at LearnDash. I've been using WordPress since 2007. I'm the lead organizer of WordCamp Orlando. It seems this year we might be skipping it due to coronavirus, unfortunately. I'm the ambassador of Wapoos, which is the mascot of WordPress. If you don't know, you should Google Wapoos and check that out. If I'm not working, I'm hanging out with my kids and family, but I'm usually working. You can find me here in the Facebook group, or you can find me on Twitter at James Tryon. Today, what we're going to be covering is an overview of how WordPress handles translations, common options for handling multilingual, pros and cons for each approach, an overview of updating translations, and audience Q&A. First off, let me leave a couple disclaimers. To start, I am paid and an employee of LearnDash, but the opinions here are my own opinions. So anything that I say about a certain plugin are directly an opinion of mine and mine alone. I am trying to stay away from naming any direct plugins because I think they all do a great job in their own way. So this is not an endorsement of any particular plugin. This is more of an overview explaining the different options or how they actually work. Also, my slides are mostly done, but I wish I would have had more time. Just like with anything, I wish I always had more time to add to what we're working on. So I do have notes. I do have a lot of stuff I would like to go over, and I have some open websites I would like to show everyone. So how does WordPress handle translations? Well, technically, WordPress doesn't actually handle translations. It doesn't actually have any support for multilingual out of the box. And I say not really, because there is options. There is ways to handle this. It's just not very clear, and it's not exactly what you would expect. So we'll go over that in a little bit. But furthermore, like I was saying earlier, LearnDash itself is a plugin that's meant to work with your ecosystem. It's meant to sit on top of what you're already doing and work alongside your business. It tries to stay out of the way and leverage whatever thing that you're using. LearnDash can answer a lot of your problems for you, meaning you can sell with it, or you could have it manage everything in all aspects of your e-learning business or course, however you would like, or you can extend it using like WooCommerce or another membership plugin to give you more functionality. That being said, just like all those other things, it sort of just falls into place. It's built to the same standards of any other WordPress plugin, and translation should work. So if you are using a tool to translate something, it should just translate. Now, we do have an add-on plugin to help. So we do have, there's a link for this at the end of the documentation, at the end of the slides, that we do have a companion plugin or an extension plugin to help WordPress Multilingual and a couple other translation add-ons for LearnDash. Now that's not needed. It's just a little extra plugin to help translate and make sure everything is seen by each other. So what are some common options for handling multilingual? Well, there's technically two direct paths. It's using a plugin or creating something native. Now, I know I said WordPress doesn't support multilingual out of the box. So we'll come back to that and explain what that actually means. But there is options, or you can use a plugin. And when we're talking about plugins, there's actually three types of plugins. And this is the area that I really wanted everyone to kind of understand and get their mind around. We're going to break this down a little bit more, talk about some examples and pros and cons of each. But the main thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with multilingual is you have three main types. One is it's going to store one post per language, meaning if you have your course in English and in Spanish, you're actually having two posts. There's other plugins that will let you save the same post, but it's saving it as more metadata, meaning there's only one single post, but it's going to have everything stored inside of that one file. So instead of having a Spanish version and an English version, you just have a single version, and inside there's Spanish and English text. Or there's a third option, which I don't really recommend, and we'll talk more about that later, but that is translating on the fly, allowing an AI generator or some type of translator to happen on your site for you and translate that. Now, there is some good there, so we'll talk about that in a moment, but that's the three main differences. You have a one-to-one post, everything inside the same post, and then everything translated on the fly. So let's talk a little bit about the one-on-one. Here's some examples of a WordPress multilingual, Polylang, Weglot, and TranslatePress. I believe they all kind of function the same. Now, I could be wrong on exactly what category the Weglot or the TranslatePress fall into. They might fall into the second one. They might actually create more meta for some, but we'll look into that and we'll figure that out together. But some of the, there's some pros here. So the nice thing about using a one-to-one relationship is the database itself is not being modified. You're actually just extending it. So let's say, I mean, the database is being modified, but the post itself is staying intact. The original post could stay intact, and then you're extending that with new posts in a different area that is not affecting your original post. So then you're just extending it, and that's extending what you currently have. You also have the ability to translate everything. So using a plugin like this, you can translate your entire site. You can translate all your menus, all your taxonomies. So we're going to talk about translating WordPress as a whole towards the end of the presentation, because right now we're talking about the ability to have someone's site change languages totally from English to Spanish or French or Chinese or Arabic, however you would like, but this is an entire site switching. There's also the concept of just having your site in a single language, so you would want to be able to translate that, and we'll talk about that at the end of how you would translate something directly like that. But using a translation tool like Local Translate, it gives you the ability to translate buttons, titles, menus, things that are built into WordPress or other plugins that aren't quite there. Also, any of these multilingual plugins that you're going to pay for, like the WordPress Multilingual, the Polylang, the TranslatePress, the Weglot, they have the ability for you to change the menus, the buttons, the text anywhere on your site. Anything that is not currently translated by default, it gives you the ability to also translate that and override. So that's a very nice feature to have once you start using some of these things. So I like that. The complexity of something like this, though, is you are creating a lot of bloat. So example is, if you're using one of these for an e-commerce solution, and let's say you have one product that has 10 different little bits of detail on it that is unique to that product, and then you have your site in 5 languages, well, now that one item, that one product now actually is 50 things in your database. So every time you're adding one thing to your store, you're actually multiplying that size and that weight by X fold per language. So you want to keep that in mind as depending on how you're going about it and translating these plugins. They can create a lot of bloat, and I'll show some charts about that in a moment. So the more I think about this, the TranslatePress is probably in the wrong location, but we'll talk about that too. So one other example between these two plugins is the multilingual plugins here, the one per language. They are going to always give you a unique URL, meaning you can have your Spanish URL, your English URL, your Arabic. You can set it up so it's all different URLs. This option, the same post stored metadata and the last post translating on the fly don't necessarily give you that, right? They're giving you the same post. You're setting a variable, which is I want Chinese or I want Spanish, and then you're translating that to the stored language. So it can be a stored meta or it can be on the fly, but the thing is that's stored. So that means it's not always a unique post. So therefore, the side effects of like an SEO down, or the fact that all your inbound links are all coming to the same, that can be different. So sometimes languages don't always translate for word to word or sections, or you might not want to offer all the same services in the different languages that you're offering, or all the same courses. So an option like this might not work for you because some of those pages might not exist. So if you need to have more freedom of control over menu structures, and you want to create entirely different views at points, I would definitely recommend going more of this side, the one per one, versus using the Qtranslate or the WP Globus stuff. Let me check something real fast. I mean, you're just going to have the same problems that you're going to have too with a database. I mean, just because you're not looking all over the place for the different pages, you're still bloating that individual page. So the more you add to any of these, it is going to slow down your site. It will create a performance issue. And then again, the biggest problem with this solution is the lack of unique permalinks. Okay, so the multilingual plugins on the fly. This is allowing like Google to translate it, or there's a lot of services that now offer this. There used to be one that they called Babelfish that you could run it through. These have gotten much better. They're not the greatest. There is a couple plugins you can use that start with the artificially generated conversions and then allow you, the user, to modify and fix anything that's blatantly wrong. So these are a good start if you don't have another option. But I would probably recommend, if you're not 100% on what these things say or what you're doing, maybe you shouldn't translate or sell your course into a language you can't support, depending on what it is. I don't want to discourage translation because translations equal accessibility. But if you're allowing a machine to do it and it could be wrong because you can't verify it, that can cause confusion, or even worse, you could offend somebody if the words don't translate right. So I would definitely hire an expert. A lot of these services or several plugins you can install that do the first pass, and then you can send that off to have someone proof them. So, the pros and cons here are you can get it very fast. It can happen for you on the fly. You can have your entire site translated with an add-on with no coding and no translations. But the cons are you have no control over that. You really don't know what it's going to say. And the different versions of which it might translate could be different, meaning there could be multiple versions of Spanish based off the region you're in. And you want to make sure that fits that culture or that region based off of what you're doing and serving that market. So a machine translation isn't always the best and could lead to more problems. But wait, there's more. Like I said earlier, there's a native way of handling multilingual, and that is going after multisite. Now, as we talk about these other ways, all translation plugins are a big undertaking. They're a huge amount of work. On top of the extra overhead and issues you now have to deal with translating everything, I don't want to name names, but several times in my career, I've had to waste weeks of my life regenerating or setting up or remapping pages because a couple of people didn't follow the instructions on how to properly create content per site, or what the order to create content is, or start with this page and then make the translations of the others. So if you're not careful, you can waste days, if not weeks of your life due to a user error of just not following the instructions on how to add content. So I'm not actually going over how to translate today and which plugin to use. There's lots of sources I'll link some, and we'll probably set up a live webinar. A live session for that, live stream session, to go into more detail to show in some of those. But today is just an overview. And it's just something to keep in mind that if you're not careful when you're adding your content, you can mess up your whole system, and you'll have to restructure that. And depending on how they're working, meaning like the setup where it's one-to-one, that's an easy fix. You just unlink and relink. But if someone goes into a translation and does it wrong, then you actually have to recreate or copy and paste and move that stuff around. And when you're not the one who speaks all the languages that are translated, that becomes a very stressful evening. So just keep that in mind. So all those other issues that come along with multilingual, you can put all those aside and open up a whole nother can of worms called multisite. I do not want to encourage multisite, but if you want to ask me, what do I think is the easiest solution to handling a multilingual area, a multilingual course, site, ecosystem, however you like, honestly, based off my research, I think the multisite's probably the easiest solution for the users. It might not be the easiest solution technically, from a technical standpoint or even a hosting standpoint, because it might not work in all environments. But what Multisite is, to take a step back, is it's taking one WordPress site, turning it into a network, and allowing you to have multiple subsites, subdomains, or subdirectories actually running off of that one site. So think of it as multiple WordPress sites running off of one WordPress. So you take all that, and then you can say, I want my main site to be in X, probably English for right now, as an example. And I say, I want my subsites to be Spanish, English, Chinese, Arabic. Now, the reason I said English again is because you can have a main site be your sales site and all that, but then you might want to actually have all your courses or something in a different language. So it might make sense to also make an additional English subsite to also store your English courses. So again, this in of itself is an entirely other long talk that we can talk about with multi-site. So I don't want to go too crazy here, but I do want to show some things, and let me take a step back and look at this here. Yeah. So here's some examples of load time. So WordPress Multilingual, let me zoom in a little here. Now, to be fair, this article is on TranslatePress. And to be clear, I have not personally used TranslatePress, but out of all the current new options, and I have used the other options, I really do want to try TranslatePress. It takes the act of translating your post and moves it to the customizer. So if anyone is familiar with the WordPress customizer, you also gain the benefit of translating. And with TranslatePress, you can click on any button, and I don't want it to sound like a sales pitch, but here's a quick example. You can literally click on the button and then translate it to whatever you need it to be. So you can translate other areas of your site that aren't directly controlled by the content using their plugin. Also, you can control the content, but that's not the point. The reason I'm showing this link is I just want everyone to see the load time. This is a 1,600 word article being translated by WP Multilingual. And then we have the same thing being translated by Polylang, Weglot, TranslatePress, and then the default WordPress. So you can use a plugin that's a very robust, very well coded plugin that allows you to do everything, but it is going to add an additional second to your website for load time. Same thing with Polylang. I mean, you can cut it down a little bit, and then the rest are not as much as the default. But see the default WordPress install? This is what the same thing as using Multisite. So if you were to use Multisite to run your translations, it's the same thing. So you can get the same results that you can with WordPress Multilingual as you can with a Multisite. But the headache, the can of worms, the server-side maintenance that comes along with that's a lot of overhead and work that I would not recommend taking on lightly. I would outweigh the pros and cons, and if your biggest decision is performance, then that's going to be pretty high up there. If you want ease of use, WordPress Multilingual, Polylang, Translate Press is great. I mean, even Weaklaw is great, but Weaklaw is a unique one that they allow their translations to be on multiple platforms. They are no longer just a WordPress plugin. They work on all CMSs. So they're sort of like a non-specific WordPress solution these days. But you can see, like, let me scroll through these charts real fast so everyone else can see. So the tricky part with a translation plugin is usually it's going to load the site, and then it's going to figure out what language it needs, and then it's going to load it again. And that's what's happening, and that's why you're seeing these like Weaklaw and WordPress Multilingual. They're technically loading the site twice. They're loading it, finding the language they need, and then reloading it. So that's why you see this much larger load time. But again, I'm not recommending this directly. I'm just saying, which battle do you want? The other thing to keep in mind is, are your users actually interacting with each other? Are they ever crossing paths? Is your WordPress install itself, does that need to be the admin? What language is that in? What language are your instructors speaking? In WordPress, you can set your profile to be whatever language you would want, whatever preferred language. You go to user profile, and then you can set that under your own. And then the site itself can have a preferred language. So your site can be right to left Arabic, and then you can say, oh, I'm actually an English speaker, so I can go in and set my preferred language. So whenever I'm adminning or changing anything in the site, I personally see English, but anybody who loads the site normally is going to see the Arabic language, and automatically see the right to left. Now, a couple of things that you can do with a multilingual is there's also plugins for this. So you can extend your multisite with a multisite language switcher using multisite language switcher or Multilingual Press. There's also a handful of other plugins that you can add to your site to help with the multilingual experience. The problem is, if you start adding a bunch of plugins that are giving you a bunch of new features, you're no longer going to be getting this load time. Here, you're going to end up on the higher side again. So you want to be careful. The more you add, the slower your site's going to be. Okay. So my thoughts in general are, I'm going to worry about my users, my teachers, and how are the instructors using the site. Personally, I have a little bit more knowledge. I'm going to come from the dev side, not a multilingual side. So I don't mind the multi-site, and I like the performance gain from that, but not all plugins work in that environment. You are going to have to set up a bunch of extra things to make that work. Not a bunch of extra things. I mean, every site is going to be its unique setup. You're going to have to tailor every page for every site. You're going to have to make menu items for every site. You're going to have to set the widgets for everything. Every time there's an update, you're going to have to run through those updates to make sure everything works in every environment on all the subsites. And there isn't anything weird that happens in any one of those unique environments because everything is now different. So every language you've now added X amount of time for that maintenance. So the maintenance and support side is a much greater cost, but the ease of use is much easier from your teachers and your users. The user experience, the editing flow, they don't have to worry about what goes where. It's a very one-to-one clear relationship between everything. And I find that to be probably the easiest solution from the user to customer to student standpoint. That does not make it the easiest solution from a development standpoint. And if you're just getting started, I don't know if I would recommend that. The Translate Press seems really nice. I think they offer you one free language and some basic translations features. And if you add the premium version, it unlocks multiple languages and everything else. I believe their premium version is the same price as the WordPress Multilingual premium version. And if I was to try anything, I would probably try that first. And if it didn't work, I would always go back to WordPress Multilingual. WordPress Multilingual has been around for 10 plus years. I've used it at least 15 times on different projects. It's always worked well. I've never had a problem with it. And even when we're looking at these charts, I'm not saying a second isn't a big deal, but it's only 1.65 seconds compared to 0.75 seconds. So it is gaining almost a full second here. but this is a translation. This isn't a native thing. The user might understand that. It's a reloading of the site. I think your users are going to give you a little bit of grace in an e-learning environment. So by no means am I discrediting WordPress Multilingual. It is a fantastic plugin and paved the way for all these others. If it was me though, probably going to start with Multisite or Translation Press, just for now and because of the new shiny aspects. So let's talk about basic translations for a little bit. So like I said earlier, if once you guys go into a multi-site environment, you're going to have a one-to-one relationship. That means everything in that site is going to be in that set language unless the user sets their profile language to be something different. That means all of your plugins, everything you've added, anything you've made custom, anything that you're using in your admin is going to try to load in that language. If it doesn't load, it's going to just have English or whatever native language was that the author created that plugin in. So you're going to need to translate that. Now, if you're doing a multilingual site with multiple languages, all the plugins we've talked about up to this point offer built-in translations or string translation support. If you don't have that, what I would recommend is using something called local translate, but we'll talk about that in a second. I'm jumping the gun a little bit. There's a couple of things you can do when you're dealing with translations. Let's talk about why and what you're doing. If this is a unique custom thing just for yourself, you could translate it right in the plugin. If it's unique for you, but you don't want to mess with the plugin, you don't want to do any coding, you can use the local translate plugin. If you want to do a more robust, full editing, change everything in one pass, you can use a desktop app, a native desktop app that's going to work Mac, PC, or Linux. It's called Poedit, and that'll work just fine. And I believe that's a free version as well. They do offer a paid version, but I believe the free version will let you handle anything. Okay, so the paid version of the PoApp lets you, it knows about how to modify and change WordPress plugin translations. The free version, you just have to set that. So it'll let you do both. But the thing that I want to talk about why and what you're doing is if it is just a random plugin from the repo, the plugin repo, or a theme from the plugin repo, you can actually give back and help. And not only can you give back and help, you would actually get a WordPress badge on your WordPress profile of saying that you've helped translate. So that's kind of cool. But you can help translate posts. So you can go and just like you can submit a GitHub issue, you can help translate languages and get credit and help translate plugins through this translateWordPress.org site. So let's check that out. I want to show everyone that. And you can help with any language that you speak. And you can see what % they're done, how many people have helped. So you can search for full languages if you want to help translate the core WordPress itself, or if you want to help translate plugins. All plugins also have some type of translation. I'll try to click on something real fast, but since I'm looking in a live demo, it probably won't work. Yeah, sometimes there's a translation one here, but that's okay because it's a live demo. We won't worry about it. But this is the local translate plugin that I was talking about. So it's going to load up and find any strings that are in your current theme, and you can translate them to whatever language you speak or they're missing. And it shows % done. And I won't go over detail on how to use this. This would be more for a live session on how to actually walk through this entire process and how to translate this. However, we do have a resource on the LearnDash site on exactly how to translate step by step if there is something that you would like to translate using the local translate or the Poedit, on how to update any missing files if you would like. There's also community posts in which you can give back. So what we should probably do is leverage the Facebook group that we're 15,000 strong at this point. We should submit a lot of our open translations to the group and see if we can wrap those up. Again, that's me speaking on behalf of me as we're talking But with such a large group, we should be able to leverage a lot of these missing translations. But yeah, check out this post. It's going to be at the end of my article. My slides will be shared in the Facebook group when we're done. But this will walk you through how to actually translate and how it works. I would always recommend moving your files to a custom location. I would not store them in the actual plugin, because if at any point the plugin is modified, changed, or updated, you could lose your translations. So make sure you save them to a location inside a custom location of your site, and that is an option inside the plugin. And here are the source articles for everything we've talked about today. The one that I was just talking about is the multilingual translation guide down here. And then earlier I was talking about the multilingual integration plugin that will help assist any translations plugin, and that's the multilingual translation here. I have I want to talk about this for a little bit. So I was going to make a couple different tips slides, and I just sort of left them here so we can ramble for a little bit and talk about these. But I've dealt with some issues recently, and I just think everyone should probably know about this. I really like the advancement of web technology and browser technology. And I think earlier, like I said, translations equals accessibility. The web should be accessible to everyone. And even browsers in Chrome itself has come a long way with natively translating text for me. So a lot of times, jokingly said, I don't use the AI translations, but I use the translations all the time built into the browser for quick, easy things. Course might be a little different, and reading another language to English is also a little different too, because I'm not too worried about what it actually means. But I'll talk about that in a second. But you do want to be careful about using, like, for example, and the reason I kept saying Arabic is because I am working on a multilingual LearnDash site right now, where the main site's in English, and then they're selling access to sub languages in different languages. So each sub-site's in a different language, and they're selling them directly and selling access. In the past, the Arabic language itself is now able to actually work inside the URL. So if you see the URL structure here on the top, you could actually have the embedded characters of the actual language versus the English style characters. The problem is that doesn't fully work yet with copy and paste. It's going to want to translate the characters into like an ASCII version of that. It's going to want to like convert them over to like numbers and percent signs and try to render them over. So the problem is that's going to affect your SEO. It's going to affect linking. They don't always work. So I would be very careful not to jump on that trend too soon. I don't want to sound unfair to the new languages. I would just worry about your rankings in the new fonts actually breaking your URL. So I would avoid that for now. Maybe use the English versions of their languages, or even stick to maybe going back to the IDs, which isn't great for SEO, but it's better than the links breaking. When you're dealing with the right to left or left to right. Now, WordPress itself is going to handle a lot of that. If you set the language natively and say, my site is X language, it's going to load the menu. It's going to switch the entire admin to accommodate that. The language files are set. So as long as the language file is set, everything else will take effect. If you're creating a custom theme, you're going to have to do a lot of that yourself when it comes to the front end, or recommend using a premium theme that's going to handle a lot of that yourself. Now, Astra is not you can use a free version of Astra, which is a premium theme, but the free version, which we use with our demo site, supports this out of the box. So you can use Astra and not have to pay the premium side of it and still get this feature of selecting Arabic and having your site automatically go left to right. Or you go back to the child theme, and I would always make sure having a child theme with anything that you're doing once you start adding modifications. I would also recommend adding any function that you make to a custom plugin so it doesn't get lost if you change themes. So as far as child themes go, I would make your CSS changes, your cascading style sheet changes, the things that make your site go from left to right, right to left. For ease of use, I would put those in separate child themes and then set those in the admin and then set all your widgets as accordingly. So that way your parent theme's doing all the heavy lifting, your child themes are just doing, right to left, left to right type stuff. Or if you're forking a premium theme, like, Astra, not forking, but making a child theme for a premium theme, then you can just set all your styles in the child theme and then use the admin controls to do left to right, right to left on top of what it already does for you out of the box. Something else to think about is culture. So our fancy site designs here in the US might not work so well overseas. By experience, I also know that in using Chinese language that, I don't want to sound rude, but based on my experience, if the font is too big, if the kanjis are too big, too spread out, it could change the meaning or almost be insulting because it comes across as they can't read it. And from my American design style, I'm literally trying to give it more space, breathing room, trying to make it stand out, and it's actually causing a problem in a different language. So you need to be careful of your design style and how that affects culture and what you do once you translate your text over. So if you're literally just converting it over to just convert over, you could be hurting yourself depending on what languages you're converting. But something like from English to Spanish is a little bit different. I wouldn't worry as much if the culture difference is there as I would from a right to left style language or something with more of a kanji based format. Also, you want to be very careful with what you're translating because not all words translate fully or direct. So as I said earlier, using something like Google Translate or like a Babelfish or Babelfish for real could be very bad. I would not recommend using that at all. It's so old. But the act of translating those words could just be slightly wrong, or the pronouns could be wrong. It doesn't, the he, she, they aspect of a translation is not always easily converted automatically. So you need to be very careful in what you're doing that you don't offend or are rude to somebody in what you're doing. And you also have a problem if you enable SEO, if you enable a multilingual feature on your pre-existing site and you change your URLs, or depending on how you actually convert over to a multilingual solution, you could hurt your SEO. The second and third options, like the automatic translation, or the ones where you're translating your post in place, so you're not actually creating a separate URL for your French version, like you're hurting your SEO there. If you convert your site over and then you make a sub-site for your English now, and you used to have your English in your main site, you could potentially be hurting your SEO there. And there's a couple options. First off, I would highly recommend setting up some proper 301 redirects, always, anytime you change anything. And two, you can always do a little custom rewrite rules with your permalinks to hide the English version and make it look like it used to look before if your version started the same. So you could map that to make that work. And the last tip that I want to say for now is you want to be careful when you're translating and take a step back. Lots of times I have tried to change something and then realized, oh, the revision version is still in the browser, or oh, I was looking at the live site, not the dev site. So that being said, if you're trying to translate a word and it's not translated and everything you've done is correct and it still doesn't translate and it looks like you've done this multiple times, there's a chance that that is actually coming in from a third-party version. So let's say you're using BuddyPress and then you install BuddyBoss. BuddyBoss is going to override a lot of those things. BuddyBoss will actually override a lot of the terms inside LearnDash. So you might think that you're changing a LearnDash term and you really should be changing it inside the actual BuddyPoss terms. Same thing goes for the same word could be used in a couple different places. For example, the term quiz, like you can give somebody a quiz or you can be quizzing someone, or you can be taking a quiz. So the act of quizzing somebody or the thing is a quiz is technically two different words depending on how they're used. So you can translate it in one place and then you might be browsing the documentation and then it shows up again. Well, it's really technically a different version of that word or used differently. So therefore you would need to translate that again. And not again, in a different place. So again, here's the resources. And I have some links open. Let me run through these links real fast with everyone. Again, this is a pretty good article I was reading about the load times and comparing the different plugins but again, it's from TranslatePress and they are competitors, so keep that in mind. But based off of that, I did find it to be a useful article. Here's a nice article from WP Beginner that talks about translations and the different versions of them as well. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's a screenshot. When you're using something like WordPress Multilingual, you start with your original post, and then you can come and say, oh, I want to set the French or German version, by clicking it, and it then creates and generates the new page, and then you would go ahead and do that. And this is another post on translating. They use the example WP Forms, how to help translate WP Forms over using the loco translate. So this post is the same thing as our LearnDash post explaining how to translate. So if you want to look at two sources on how to do that and compare them, both the links are in my slide notes. So both these links are here for everyone to share, to use. And I'll make sure this is posted up in the Facebook group once we're done. This is a document from WordPress itself outlining how multilingual works and some pros and cons and some different languages. The problem with this article is it's probably 6 years old. So some of these plugins are outdated and I would be careful using them. In theory, they're examples, but if a plugin has not been updated in the past year, I would probably avoid using it. Some of these in this list have not been updated in 4 or 5 years. So please be careful. Don't randomly install anything. Also, make sure you always have a backup before you do anything. And if you're going to convert over to a multilingual site and this is, I would make sure you're working in a development environment first. Please don't just turn it on and start going. Turn it on a development environment first. Make sure you test, you understand what you're doing. You make sure you have a game plan that this is the order and how we're going to translate. We always start with this language first, then we add the following. And then make sure everyone on your team understands and is following that process, and you should have very little issue. It's when the process is not followed, you start to run into issues. WordPress Multilingual is probably the widest used, oldest running multilingual solution. I would probably recommend getting the $80 version because you're going to need it for some of the other stuff, especially if you're using WooCommerce or selling your course through WooCommerce. The runner-up to that is this Polylang. They've been around a while too. I would just want to mention them because they have a free version where you let you translate one language, so you can take your site and go bilingual. But if you want to go multilingual, you need to pay for their language, their plugin. And then same thing with the TranslatePress. They all run about the same. And then there's a couple versions of free versions of the plugins in the repo. Like this one was updated about 4 months ago. This is going to give you some basic features, some basic translation stuff, and help you modify your language files. So that's all I got for today. So let's check on some questions in the group and see what we have. If anyone wants to jump on or talk, we can definitely jump on and share, mics if you want to jump on. So feel free to raise your hand if anyone wants to do that. Someone else, is LearnDash adding more translations? We currently have 3 translations in our existing site, Indian, Indonesian, and the Philippines translation, and these are not very common. So I think LearnDash offers support for all types of languages, whatever language anyone would like. The system is meant to support that. Right now, we only offer English is the only one that we're currently supporting, but there is multiple out there that have been started and community driven. A lot of them are more than 50% done. So I think, like I said earlier, I think that's something we should definitely get the community to rally behind, because we're getting a very large Facebook group. So I think if everyone could get involved, we can make some of this translation process a little easier for everyone, and then everyone wins. Because I can tell you, our team is growing at LearnDash, but we all don't speak all the languages yet. It's a handful, probably at least 10, but we're getting there. Feel free to ask any questions in the group if you have any chat questions. And while we're waiting for any more questions, just to let everyone know that these questions come from the Facebook group. These webinars are meant for you, and for our training standpoint, this is a beginner intro webinar. We'll have a more advanced webinar on translations in the future. Any topics that that anyone would like discussed or covered, please create a post or tag me in the Facebook group, and we'll make sure we add it to the list. We are also listing upcoming Facebook groups, upcoming webinars on our site. So let's take a look at that. Let's pull that up real fast. And I hope everyone checks out the new site. I think it looks great. So if we go to the resources, we not only have our blogs and our old videos, we also have a new webinar section that shows upcoming webinars. Feel free to jump in, sign up for any of these, and more content will be posted up to the Facebook group as we get closer to each of these webinars. Janet asked a question. So these plugins capabilities only translate things native to WordPress pages, post items, not learning. Okay, so a couple things. Some of these plugins will translate everything for you. So any content in WordPress Multilingual can be translated. Any buttons can be translated. Anything that has a string translation can be translated, meaning anything that's set up to be translated but is missing copy can be translated. Now, I don't want to overspeak here. What I'm going to think, and what I remember, and it's been a couple of years since I've used WordPress Multilingual, if the text is not set up for a translation string, it will not work. You would just have to modify that in your theme or plugin to support that translation string. And once that translation string is added, then whatever tool you're using to translate it can then take over. And what I mean by that is, instead of saying the button text, it would be like open bracket, question mark, PHP, some type of like $sign %S symbol or something that represents the English language. And then it would have the English, button text and close it. And then the translation tool can find that string and be like, oh, this is an English version of button text. We can make it be whatever we want it to be in our system. And then you can set that. Now, Translate Press claims you don't need that. Translate Press means you can just click on anything in their customizer view and you can change it. So Janet, if that's something that you're interested in, I would probably lean more towards Translation Press, because it seems to do that. Click on anything, it gives you the ability to save it whatever language you want, override it, and then it gets created for you. Okay, so Pierre asked, just to be sure that the Translation Press and WordPress Multilingual, the LearnDash course needs to be created a different language for each website or for each version. So yes, you would need to create your own version, a different language. No, okay. I don't want to overspeak, because you could probably set that up multiple ways. You can set it up so each one is its own, unique, separate, different thing. Or you can say that it's being translated, but it's the same thing. So you can, not to get overcomplicated, but you can have them all languages can be completely different, or you can have all languages still technically be different, but served as the same thing. So you can use like a language switcher and have them change between. So what I'm saying is you can have all your languages be mapped, or you can have all your languages be not mapped. So that is up to you, how you want that to happen. Both ways would work, Pierre. And if I'm saying your name wrong, I apologize. Now, some of them, like the, let's go back and look at my slides just to make sure. Some of them, like this Q-Translate and WP Globus, do not. They translate in the fly on the same page, and this is your English page, is your French page. It's just loading different content per switch. That can affect SEO, but that's a good solution. Also, then you have things like Transposh and Global Translate, which convert on the fly. So this is in browser translating, but the nice thing is, I believe Translate Press and Global Posh, and I also believe WordPress Multilingual and Translate Press both do, all four of these do what I'm about to say. I believe they can generate the copy for you on the fly the first time, let you save it, and then let you edit it. So it does the bulk of it for you the first time and says, this is a rough draft, you need to fix it. So that's a really nice starting point. I would not leave that up to chance, though. Always have someone check it. And then I know that I believe Polyglot, WordPress Multilingual, and Translate Press all offer third-party services into their app that lets you buy translation services, which means I need this page translated. I don't speak Chinese. Can someone please translate this for me in Chinese? You send it to their service. They send it back to you through your WordPress admin, by the way, and that would translate for you. Now, the last thing I do want to say, since we're talking about some of the translations and jumping around stuff, like if you did use a WordPress multi-site, you can install some plugins to help make that jump smoother and map things. So yeah, the WordPress multilingual switcher will also allow you to do the mapping here, just like you wanted to do. So if you did go to the multi-site and you wanted to say, oh, this is here, just like these tools that we were talking about earlier, where you can hit the plus sign and map something, you can do the same thing with multi-site too. So you can do that feature with almost any of the plugins. It just depends on how much work you want to go and the URL structure. So the most important takeaway from what I think this webinar is today is, how do you want your URL structure to work? And if that's the case, I would probably go a 1-to-1 ratio, one of those options, or the multi-site. And I would always make sure that you're looking out for your users and the cultural barrier differences between translations. Just because you convert something to a language doesn't mean it's going to work. So make sure you're keeping your users in mind when you're converting over your user interfaces. So that puts us right at the 45-minute mark. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach me in the Facebook group. And any new topics, feel free to tag us there, and keep an eye out for upcoming webinars. We really appreciate our Facebook audiences and everyone's participation there. So hope everyone has a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving if you celebrate, or a fantastic family time if you can get close to each other and stay safe. Thanks, everyone.